Dear participants, we have received all your messages from all over the world. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Chukala Amalia, and I'll be the facilitator of today's webinar, which is titled European Funding Opportunities for African Startups and Tech Hubs. The Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission has launched an initiative with the aim to foster innovation cooperation between Africa and Europe. This initiative focuses on the formation of partnerships between tech hubs and accelerators. As part of the project, capacity upgrading activities are implemented in light of increasing the knowledge and skills to facilitate African entrepreneurship and innovation, as well as technology and innovation partnerships between Europe and Africa. The main purpose of the webinar is to raise the awareness on the EU funding schemes which are available for entrepreneurs and tech hubs. All questions that might arise are going to be answered in a special question and answer section which will follow the presentation. So let me walk you through today's agenda. During the first part of the webinar, the 3 existing funding programs are going to be presented. During the second part, the Horizon 2020 call will be presented. And furthermore, you will receive information for the first steps into an EU application and some do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Finally, a 10-minute question and answer session will be available for all. Be informed that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel and also will be uploaded to the African-Europe Innovation Partnership site. Now, I will give the floor to Mr. Carlos Hinojosa. Mr. Hinojosa Carlos is part of the African-Europe Innovation Partnership core team, in charge of leading capacity upgrading activities of the project. He specializes in European public policies aimed at strengthening science, technology, and innovation. He also has great experience in the promotion of cooperation between Europe and African and Latin American countries. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Amalia. So I'm assuming that you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and share my screen with you so that everybody can see the PowerPoint that we've prepared. And just as a reminder, what we'll also do after today's webinar is that we'll email all of you the PowerPoint that we're using today, just to make sure that you have all of the information, because you're going to see it's a bit lengthy and it has a lot of information, but we just want to make sure that we covered all of the angles. So rest assured, you'll have the electronic version of this file sent to you later today. So just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. And if Amalia or Noemi can confirm if you can see the first slide.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so thank you very much, Amalia, for that very kind introduction. So my name is Carlos Hinojosa, and I have the pleasure of leading the capacity upgrading component of the Africa-Europe Innovation Partnership, or the AEIP, which some of you may have already heard about. Basically, what we're doing is that we're organizing a series of activities within the framework of the AEIP in order to upgrade capacities, allowing to strengthen innovation ecosystems in Africa, as well as strengthening EU-Africa cooperation in the field of innovation. So before we get started on the actual subject matter of today's webinar, what I wanted to do is make sure that everybody was aware of the fact that on the AEIP website, we have a number of resources which are publicly available and you can directly access. I'm going to take you through that at the end of the presentation today, including much of the material and information that I'm going to be presenting today. So I also wanted to present to you the way that the capacity upgrading activities, which will be delivered as part of the AEIP, are structured. We're basically designing 5 different capacity upgrading modules, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. What we're presenting today in terms of EU funding opportunities for African tech hubs and startups and entrepreneurs is actually linked to the first module of capacity upgrading that we've organized as part of the AEIP. That is to say that there's 4 subsequent modules which are still being developed and will be delivered, which may also be of interest to you, so I recommend that you keep your eyes peeled for whatever we publish on the website, and there will be a number of subsequent webinars as well, which may be of interest to you. So we're only getting started in terms of capacity upgrading. This module, which is module 1, focusing on EU funding opportunities for tech hubs and entrepreneurs, is only the first one of a series of 4 additional modules which are yet to come. Good. So in terms of what you can expect to learn by reading up and following module 1, basically what we aim to achieve is to present a landscape of EU funding opportunities which are designed to support African startups and tech hubs in their day-to-day work, particularly when it comes to innovating, and also strengthen EU-Africa cooperation in the field of innovation. We want to offer everybody who's interested, particularly tech hubs and startups and entrepreneurs in Africa, a clear overview of what currently exists in terms of funding opportunities, along with the types of activities and target groups that these activities are intended to support. So that's really, in a nutshell, what we're aiming to achieve through this webinar, as well as the first capacity upgrading module. Perhaps before I move forward, I'd like to mention that a face-to-face workshop was already delivered in Nairobi in September, I believe, of this year. There might be some of you who are joined the webinar today that were present there during that event. Just to let you know that much of what we're going to cover today has already been covered during that event, so you might want to decide to either disconnect or just read up on the PowerPoint afterwards if you consider it relevant and necessary. Okay, good. So again, just to make sure that we manage expectations correctly, what you can expect to gain from reading up and following Module 1 of our capacity upgrading is to understand better the current state of EU-Africa cooperation in the field of early-stage innovation and entrepreneurship, to better understand the types of funding programs and institutions offering this type of support, understand the basic rules of eligibility, and find out some basic information in terms of where to look for information, who to contact in case you're interested in pursuing some of these opportunities. On the other hand, what you should not expect to receive when reading into this information and following this type of webinar is information on support programs which are funded by specific European member states or by African national or regional institutions. We're really focusing on the work being done by the European Commission at the European level. You should not expect to receive detailed guidance on application procedures and reimbursement and eligibility rules. We're just going to skim the surface of this. And you should not expect to receive information on programs and financing instruments which are meant to support the financing of large-scale infrastructures or student mobility. This is not what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, now that we've gotten that out of the way, we wanted to go directly into the first part of the presentation, which, as Amalia already mentioned, relates to the types of instruments and institutions which are currently providing support to either startups or tech hubs in the field of innovation. And we're referring exclusively to European institutions at the European level, not at the European member state level. What we call the member state are the different countries who make up the EU. And here what we're basically going to do is we're going to go over 3 types of instruments or institutions. I do want to mention that given that there are a number of instruments, we won't be able to go in depth into all of them. I do recommend that you read up on what we've prepared, which is available on our website, which presents a level of information which is much more detailed compared to what I'm going to be presenting today. Okay, so we're going to be talking first about some of the work that's being done by the European Investment Bank. Secondly, we're going to be talking about some of the work and instruments being financed through EuropeAid, which is the European Union's development cooperation policy. And the third instrument that we're going to be talking about is Horizon 2020, which some of you might already have heard about, which is the main European funding instrument in support of research and innovation activities. So those are basically the three programs and institutions that we're going to be covering today. Okay, good. So in terms of the European Investment Bank, most of you may already know that the European Investment Bank is the lending arm of the European Union. Many of you probably already heard about the World Bank or the African Development Bank. These are lending banks, right, who work in the field of development cooperation. Well, in the EU, they have a specific financing institution, which is the European Investment Bank. And what's particular about the European Investment Bank is that they not only support the financing of projects within the European Union, but they also support European development cooperation by granting loans and financial support to countries and stakeholders in countries outside of the European Union. And this includes Africa, of course. So this is why it's interesting to talk about the EIB. One of the interesting things to know about the EIB is that it is one of the world's largest multilateral lenders, and it's the biggest provider of climate finance, just for you to get an idea of the size of the operations that are being implemented within the EIB. It focuses on 4 areas, which are innovation and skills, small businesses, infrastructure, climate and environment. And it's also interesting to know that they lend not only to the public sector, but also to the private sector. The EIB has a very strong line of work when it comes to supporting financial intermediaries in developing countries that will also provide support to SMEs and startups. So before talking about one of the main instruments the EIB is currently supporting, which is called Boost Africa, what I do want to mention is that the EIB tends to also operate in many African countries through a number of financial intermediaries that can in turn provide financial support through the form of loans, for example, for small, medium enterprises. And so it's important for any of you that are interested in learning about where the EIB is providing support, that you actually try to look up the financial intermediaries, these generally tend to be banks, that are working with the EIB in your home countries. And in order to do that, there is a website which we've listed here at the bottom of this slide, which can allow you to identify the types of banks and other financial institutions in your countries that are receiving support from the EIB and that are providing lines of credit to small and medium enterprises in your home countries. Okay, so that's in terms of kind of the mainstream work that the EIB is doing. In addition to that, the European Investment Bank has launched, or is in the process of launching, a very interesting initiative called Boost Africa. And some of you might have heard about Boost Africa already, but Boost Africa is a joint initiative between the African Development Bank and the EIB. And basically the rationale behind this initiative is that Africa, of course, has one of the world's fastest growing economies and a very young and quickly growing population. But in spite of this, the continent's socioeconomic and technological progress is hampered or endangered because of a number of reasons, but one of them is the fact that young graduates are leaving or failing to return home at the end of their studies. So the idea behind Boost Africa is to develop a platform allowing to launch globally competitive companies from Africa. And I'm going to explain about how they intend to do so. But before doing so, I want to talk about the 3 main objectives of Boost Africa. The first one is to deliver innovative, additional, and long-term financial capacities in Africa when it comes to supporting startups and entrepreneurs in high potential sectors and fields. And they're going to be doing this through what they call the investment program. The second objective is to provide a series of business advisory services and transfer skills to entrepreneurs in order to help them grow in an efficient and sustainable way. And this is going to be done through a technical assistance pool And the third objective is to just improve the availability of knowledge and information and networks developed regarding the development of entrepreneurship and small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa. And this they're going to do through the implementation of what they call an innovation and information lab. So you'll see that there's basically 3 pillars linked to 3 key objectives of Boost Africa. It's also important to notice that it's going to span the whole venture segment, including seed funds, incubators, accelerators, follow-on funds, business angels funds. So it's really going to cover the whole segment. And there's going to be a specific emphasis on supporting intermediaries that focus on youth and women as final beneficiaries. I'm not going to go into any further detail on Boost Africa, but my main message that I wanted to get across is that this is really an initiative being implemented by the EIB, which really falls directly into the line of work of the Africa-Europe Innovation Partnership, and which could be of high relevance not only to startups and entrepreneurs, but also to tech hubs in the region. I recommend that if you want to find out more about Boost Africa, you access their Q&A page, which can be found on the link that we've listed on the presentation, or that you contact the representative of your European Union delegation in your home country, which tends to host a representative of the European Investment Bank as well. So I'm sure that they can provide additional information. Okay, so that was Boost Africa and the EIB in a nutshell. The second type of instrument that we wanted to talk about is EuropeAid. So EuropeAid is basically the European Union Development Cooperation Policy. So they do a lot of work exclusively in developing countries, of course. They do not only focus on supporting economic development or innovation and entrepreneurship. This is just part of what they do, and they have some really interesting stuff going on out there. But it's also important for you to know that EuropeAid focuses on a much larger range of issues, which are more traditionally linked to international development aid, such as peace and security, the environment, human rights, etc. As opposed to what I just presented in terms of Boost Africa, which is managed by the European Investment Bank, here EuropeAid is managed by a different branch of the European Commission, which is called the Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as DEVCO. Okay? So this is the overall context of EuropeAid. You guys might have heard of it already. It's managed by DEVCO, and as I mentioned before, you can find DEVCO representatives in the EU delegations, which are present in most of the countries in Africa, if not all. What we did want to focus on particularly today is one of the most relevant instruments for the AEIP, which is supported by EuropeAid, which is the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific EU program to strengthen research and innovation capacity in ACP countries, which is implemented as part of the Cotonou partnership. Some of you might have heard about the ACP. So that basically refers to African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. It's basically one of the instruments that the European Union has in terms of cooperating with these 3 regions across the world. And this particular program, as its name says, is really focused on strengthening research and innovation capacities in ACP countries. It's built on a number of previous capacity building programs, which have been implemented since 2006. And throughout the years, it's supported more than 200 academic and research institutions across all of the ACP countries. Now, again, in terms of the rationale, there's basically 3 points which underpin this particular program. The first one being that new technologies, knowledge, and innovations are powerful drivers of inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic development. The second one being that ACP countries are already engaging in innovation dynamics and can be effectively supported through differentiated approaches. And the third one is that there's a strong belief that investments in research and innovation capabilities can pay a high dividend if these are embedded in an effective innovation ecosystem. So currently, the ACP EU program to strengthen research and innovation is in the process of being renewed, and we already know a number of things about how it's going to work and how it's going to be implemented. basically they have three pillars that they're going to be supporting. The first one is an innovation fund, which is the first line of the table that you can see on this slide. The objective of the ACP Innovation Fund is to foster a conducive research and innovation environment across all ACP countries by strengthening capacities on key enabling dimensions. I think this is going to be one of the pillars that is going to be of most interest to both tech hubs and startups in Africa. Basically because the Innovation Fund is going to be providing grants with the primary objective of redistributing funding to third parties on a regional basis. And these grants are going to be directed and targeting specific companies and specific tech hubs that will gain access to this. So the Innovation Fund's call for grants is not yet published. It's probably going to be published in the different regions in 2020. What is happening right now is that there is a call for proposals for intermediaries, again, that will be in charge of running the different grant schemes and calls for grants that will be further implemented down the road. So again, here the recommendation is for all of you to keep your eyes open for the calls for projects that will be implemented as part of the ACP Innovation Fund. In addition to the Innovation Fund, the ACP EU program is also going to implement a research hub, an innovation hub, and this is basically a knowledge platform which will be developed online, which will allow to disseminate and circulate much of the knowledge and experiences gained through the other pillars of the program. And last but not least, there is an important policy dimension also to this program, whereby specific public authorities and government institutions can request policy support through the form of advisory services that will be delivered by expert groups put together by the ACP EU program. So you'll see that there's three different pillars to the program. The first one is the Innovation Fund, which I believe will be the most interesting and relevant for specific startups and tech hubs. But the second pillar might be interesting as well in terms of the knowledge and data that will be made available through the Innovation Hub and the platform that will be developed accordingly. So again, if you want to find out more about the ACP Innovation Fund and the program in general, there is currently a call for proposals for the Innovation Fund that is currently open. You might want to have a look at that. And also what we recommend you do, if this is something that interests you, you can contact your local EU delegation or EIB representative for additional information. Okay, so those are the first two programs and institutions that we wanted to cover, which are currently offering or will offer in 2020 a number of different opportunities in terms of funding support for either tech hubs or startups. The third program that we really wanted to focus on is the Horizon 2020 program. As I mentioned initially, the H2020 program is the main funding instrument of the European Commission to support research and innovation. I'm sure that many of you have already heard about it. I do want to introduce an important caveat before going on to presenting the H2020 program. Sorry. That caveat is that the way that the program is designed is that it's implemented in different cycles. The current cycle of the program is the 2014-2020 cycle, which means that the current version of the program or the current generation of the program is currently coming to an end and will be renewed next year with a slightly different set of rules and criteria and objectives. They're in the process of being finalized. What I'm going to be presenting today are the rules and the way that the program currently works under the 2014-2020 period. But it is important for you to know that what I'm going to be presenting today is going to undergo a number of adjustments and changes starting in 2021, when not only the basic structure of the program will be slightly changed, but also the name of the program will be slightly changed. The program will no longer be called Horizon 2020, it will be called Horizon Europe. So if you come across any information on a program called Horizon Europe, basically it's good for you to know that it's the new generation or the new version of Horizon 2020. Some of you might have heard of other expressions such as the framework program, the 6th framework program, or the 7th framework program. These are basically the names that have been given to the subsequent versions of this program throughout time. Okay, having said that, the general objectives of Horizon 2020 are to ensure that Europe produces world-class science, that key barriers to innovation are removed, and the program is basically meant to make it easier for both the public and private sectors to work together in delivering innovation. It targets not only research institutions, but also private sector organizations, such as startups, firms, and multinationals who are interested in engaging in research, development, and innovation activities. And also something that is very important for you to know, and I'm going to go into this a bit further on, is that it's open to participation for stakeholders not only within Europe, but also outside of Europe. It's a program that's open to the world, and this is really one of the key innovations of Horizon 2020 as compared to some of its predecessors, is that there is a very, very strong emphasis on participation from stakeholders outside of the European Union, including Africa. So that's something which is very important for you to know. Okay, what are some of the reasons for which you might want to participate in Horizon 2020? Well, there's a number of reasons that might act as motivators for you. It gives you access to ambitious research and innovation projects. It provides support to mobility to and from Europe, provides access to new networks and alliances, also access to very high quality and world-class research infrastructure. And it also provides opportunities for research funding. There's a number of reasons for which you might want to be interested in applying to Horizon 2020 and the different instruments that it supports. It's a very large program. I forgot to mention that under the current programming cycle, it's providing almost 80 billion euros in support to research and innovation activities. Okay, as I was mentioning, Horizon 2020 is open to the world, which means that international participation is encouraged, and in some cases, it's even mandatory. So as you'll probably find out when you start doing research on how Horizon 2020 works, there are some calls for proposals or calls for research and innovation projects which not only encourage consortia to include members or actors from third countries, but it's actually, in some cases, a mandatory requirement. So it's very important for you to know which particular calls are going to be targeting African countries for you to be able to participate eventually at those calls if you find them relevant. So what you'll see is when you look at the different calls for proposals and the work programs that are adopted as part of Horizon 2020, there's specific topics where calls will indicate that international partners should participate, or there is mandatory participation of these partners. So in terms of the eligibility, there's also funding, so which partners who eventually participate in Horizon 2020 may receive financial support. There are basically two types of categories. There's countries which can be automatically funded, and that obviously includes the member states of the European Union, but it also includes a list of countries which are listed in Appendix A of the work program. This is a bit of technical jargon, but what I want to say today is that the great majority of African countries are eligible to receive support, financial support, if you participate in Horizon 2020 projects or calls. This is a key difference compared to other countries, perhaps a bit more developed countries which are outside of the EU, which can participate in Horizon 2020 projects, but they cannot receive financial support. So they only gain access to the networks and the partnerships and the research that's being done, but they have to fund it themselves, as opposed to African countries and stakeholders which can actually receive financial support through Horizon 2020. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details about how Horizon 2020 is structured and how it works, because it's a very complex and large program. the Horizon 2020 waters are sometimes a bit complex to navigate. Our objective with today's presentation and the material that we've developed as part of the AEIP is to provide you with some key lessons and understanding of the program, which will make your life easier if you do decide to dig in deeper into Horizon 2020 or some of the other programs that I've mentioned. But in a nutshell, Horizon 2020 is currently structured around 3 different types of pillars, which are going to determine the types of activities and the types of calls that are implemented under Horizon 2020. The first one has to do with promoting excellent science, which is mostly driven by proposals put forward by researchers. The second pillar is industrial leadership, which is mostly driven by the industrial sector in light of conducting strategic investments in key technologies. And the third pillar is called societal challenges. And this pillar is basically aimed at tackling some of the great challenges that our societies are facing today. And as you can see on this slide, there are a number of instruments that are implemented under these 3 different pillars. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail of this. You can read up on this in the handbook that's been developed and is available on the Africa-Europe Innovation Partnerships resource website. You can also read about it here on the presentation further down the road. What's important for you to know is that under each of the 3 different pillars that I mentioned, there are different instruments, and that for each of those instruments, there's going to be a different working program and different calls for proposals that are going to be implemented on a regular basis. So what's important for you to know is that you have to identify the specific instrument that seems more or less relevant or of interest to you. And then once you've done that, you want to go ahead and read the work program that is established on a 2-year basis for each of the different instruments, and read up on that work program to get a better understanding of the types of calls that are going to be published, what those calls are focusing on, and who's eligible to participate. And this is all part of the process that we encourage you to carry out, which is making sure that you set up a good monitoring system to identify the types of calls and the lines of funding which are available through Horizon 2020 based on the needs and the interests of your particular tech hub, of your particular company. And again, I do apologize that this all seems a bit complex at this point in time. Believe me, Horizon 2020 is a little bit complex, but the European Commission has taken a number of measures to make sure that everything is broken down in a relatively simple and straightforward manner for anybody who's interested in gaining access to Horizon 2020 to be able to understand how the system works and how they can eventually access some of the support being provided through Horizon 2020. Okay, just to finalize with Horizon 2020, there's 2 ways that you can access support. Either you do it as an individual researcher, for example, or you can access support through collaborative projects, which basically means that you're going to set up a consortia of organizations or institutions which are going to develop a common collaborative research and innovation project. Again, there's a number of resources which are at your disposal if you want to learn more about Horizon 2020. One very important thing to know about Horizon 2020 is that they've developed a network of national contact points. Basically, national contact points are representatives in your home countries which are hosted in, for example, ministries of higher education or ministries of science, technology, and innovation. And they've been appointed in order to provide information to potential participants of Horizon 2020 which are interested in learning more about the different opportunities. So what I recommend you do is that you type into your search engine national contact point plus the name of your country, and then you'll find the name of the person or the organization that is actually in charge of sharing additional information on Horizon 2020, and they might even be able to point you in the right direction in terms of the right call for you or potential other institutions which are interested in applying to Horizon 2020 with whom you could partner with in case you're interested. So before wrapping up, I did want to present two specific Horizon 2020 instruments or calls, which are open or upcoming, which may be of interest to your organization. The first one is the Horizon 2020 call called International Partnership Building between European and African Innovation Hubs. Okay, so it fits like a glove, right? It's good for you to know that this call is currently open. The deadline is the 22nd of April 2020. So if you're interested, you have to act fast. And it really targets low and middle income countries in Africa. The specific challenge is to reinforce cooperation and strategic partnership with selected countries in Africa to support the strengthening of existing digital innovation hubs, or DIHs, in Africa, in order to facilitate collaboration between EU and African digital innovation hubs. This is a call which is currently being implemented under the work program Information and Communication Technologies, which is, you recall what I presented earlier on the structure of Horizon 2020. It's that middle pillar that has to do with leadership in enabling and industrial technologies. So really, this is a call that might be really interesting to you, particularly if you're working in the field of information and communication technologies. If you want to know more about this particular call, what we recommend you do is that you go ahead and look at some of the resources that we've identified here. The call is currently open. The information is available on the Horizon 2020 Funding Opportunities portal. And as I mentioned before, if this is something that interests you, we suggest that you contact your national contact point for Horizon 2020. I went through this fairly quickly, but there's some additional information in the presentation when it comes to the specific objectives, how the consortia should be structured, and the type of participation they're expecting from African countries as well. So if you want to read up more on this particular call, we encourage you to have a look online and have a look on what we've included in the presentation. Okay, so just in a nutshell, to conclude, when it comes to Horizon 2020, it is a very, very important program which is in the process of being renewed. It offers a range of opportunities for both startups and companies in general, including more mature companies. It's open to participation on behalf of African countries. In many cases, participation is not only encouraged, but it's mandatory. So there's really a very important window of opportunity for those of you who might be interested in participating in this type of projects. But I do want to be completely candid and straightforward with you. It's a complex program. It's fairly competitive, meaning that the rate of selection is not extremely high. But really the key to success is to make sure that you build a good proposal based on a strong partnership, and that you do so ahead of time. It generally takes about a year between the time you identify the call and the time that you put together a strong proposal. So anticipation is a very, very, very important element for you to take into account if you're interested in pursuing this opportunity of tapping into Horizon 2020. Okay, there's one additional instrument supported by Horizon 2020 that is maybe of relevance or interest to you. In this case, it supports the mobility of individuals, whether they're research staff or members of management teams within a company, for example, to and from European companies. This is called the Research and Innovation Staff Exchange. This is a tool which we'd like to present because it's been historically underutilized by African participants. So there's really a keen interest to increase the levels and the rates of participation on behalf of African stakeholders in this particular tool. Basically, RISE is an instrument supported by Horizon 2020 which funds short-term exchanges of personnel between academic, industrial, and commercial organizations throughout the world. It's aimed to help people develop their knowledge, skills, and careers while building links between organizations working in different sectors of the economy, including universities, research institutes, SMEs, and startups as well. It's open to staff and individuals of any nationality and any career level, from PhD preparation to very experienced researchers. But it also includes staff members working in managerial, technical, or administrative roles. So that's also important for you to know. And basically what they do is they provide grants allowing for people to work in institutions in other countries as part of a collaborative project. And they provide financing, which allows to cover salaries and subsistence costs for the individuals who are engaging in the mobility or are going to the different countries and institutions which are part of the project. Again, this is a program that may be of interest to you. If you want to find out more about RISE and when the calls for RISE participation are open, we suggest that you have a look at this particular link that we've identified here, which provides additional information on the calls, the eligibility criteria, the rules of engagement, etc., etc. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. What I wanted to do is just wrap up with a couple of suggestions on how you may go about applying to some of these instruments that I've just presented. Before I present these different steps and recommendations, what I do want to suggest is that you have a look at the AEIP platform, and particularly the resources section, because there we've identified and we've developed and we've uploaded a number of tools and practical exercises which, if you are interested, will help you flesh out your particular idea that you might have in order to participate in one of these programs. It will help you better understand how to build a consortium. They're basically practical tools and exercises that will help you go through the process of applying to some of these instruments. But in a nutshell, what we've done is we've identified 5 different key steps which will allow you to apply for some of these EU funding instruments. The first one is to make sure that you adequately define your need and then formulate it as a project, giving it its specific intervention logic. This may seem straightforward, but it's actually trickier than it seems initially. Basically, what we mean by this is that you may very well have a good idea that you might want to submit in terms of, in order to receive support. But what is very important is for you to be able to formulate that idea as a project with a specific rationale, with a specific objective, and with a specific understanding of how you're going to turn the resources that you're going to receive through the different funding instruments into activities which will lead to the intended input and the intended impact. And in addition to this, it's very important for you to be able to formulate this idea in a way which is in line with the key objectives of the European Union's different funding instruments. As I mentioned before, each of these different instruments has a particular expected impact or rationale. So you have to make sure that when you formulate a project, you do so in a way which makes it compatible or very much in line with the key priorities of the different funding instruments that we've just presented. So again, here what we've developed is a specific tool which we call a project fact sheet, which is a very simple tool which allows you to go through the thought process of how you go from a fairly fuzzy or draft idea to actually fleshing it out into a more full-fledged project which will stand on its own 2 feet. The second step is identifying the right call and instrument to support your project. So as you've seen, there's a range of instruments that are out there which might be relevant to your particular idea or project. It's very important for you to be able to identify the right call and understand why that call is the right call or support instrument for you. In order to do so, we've developed a specific tool which is called an analysis of a call and matchmaking between the project and the call, which is also available online. And again, it's a very simple tool which will allow you to better understand which type of instrument will be better suited to support the implementation of the project that you have in mind. The third point is understanding the rules of the game. So it's very important for you to read up on the supporting material. that is available for each of these different programs. So here basically what we recommend you do is you go online, you read up on the different programs, you follow some of these programs and some of these institutions on social media just to make sure that you have a good understanding of what's in the pipeline in terms of the upcoming opportunities. And the last 2 points are building a strong team or consortium. Here again, we put together a nice little tool which is called Find the Relevant Partners for Your Project. And the third point is establishing boundaries. So once you've set up your consortia and your team you're going to be working with, you want to make sure that you set the right rules of the game that clearly define who is doing what, and eventually which of the results belong to who. One of the things which often keeps people from engaging in collaboration with other institutions in the framework of collaborative research and integration projects are issues having to do, for example, with management and property of intellectual property. And so it's very important that you also learn which tools and rules exist which will allow you to better manage expectations, which will in time also reduce the possibility of the emergence of conflicts and disputes as a part of collaborative projects. So in a nutshell, these are the steps that you might want to think about when engaging in some of these projects and programs that we've just presented. Again, we've developed a number of tools which are available online, which may help you undergo this process. So I think that we're going to leave it at that, so we can open up the floor to potentially some questions and answers. Before stopping, I would like to remind everybody that the PowerPoint is going to be shared with all of you. The PowerPoint includes some additional information on each of these 5 different steps. But again, if you want to have the full picture of what the AEIP has developed in terms of access to EU funding for startups and tech hubs, the best thing to do is to go directly to our website and click on the resource section so that you can gain full access to that. And just to show you what that looks like, if you can see my screen as well, I'm currently on the home page of the AEIP, which, if you don't already know, I invite you to have a look at. And on this website, you have a resources tab up here. You also have a resources section here, which is basically the same. And once you click on that, it will take you directly to the reference material that I've mentioned on a number of occasions today, which includes the handbook on European funding, as well as a number of reference materials which are linked to the different topics and issues that have been addressed. So I thank you very much for your time and for having listened into this presentation. I hope that it met your expectations. I hope that it's going to be useful. It's always very complicated to transmit a large volume of information through webinars, but it's been designed to give you a first taste and a first insight into some of these programs that we've identified and screened, and hopefully this will wake some curiosity in you to read up a bit more on these programs and on these institutions that will potentially eventually lead you to gain access to some of the support which is currently being offered by the European Union.